speech is such an important part of what we do as human beings, something that our species is unique to our species, it makes sense that there's probably parts of the brain that are devoted exclusively for speech perception. And sure enough, there are. We know this by studying persons that have brain damage, specifically persons, for example, that have strokes that affect very specific areas of their cortex. One type of brain damage can cause what is known as Broca's aphasia. Now, aphasia is the word meaning inability to speak. It's a Greek word for not, unable to speak, unable to produce words. And people with Broca's aphasia have damage in a part of their frontal lobe, which has been called Broca's area. It was first identified by a guy named Paul Broca back in the late 1800s, I believe. People who have suffered damage to Broca's aphasia, um, they have a really hard time producing speech. So Broca's area seems to be involved with speech production. So their speech is very labored. It's very cut off, very telegraphic. They have a really hard time producing speech, but they can understand speech. So Broca's area apparently is involved in speech production, but not speech understanding. Another area of the brain is associated with a type of a clinical condition called Wernicke's aphasia. And we have another area in the temporal lobe, a little bit further back in the temporal lobe of the brain, called Wernicke's area. If a stroke happens to affect Wernicke's area, um, a lot of patients that have Wernicke's area will exhibit this symptom that has sometimes been referred to as word salad. So it's just this mix of disorganized, meaningless words. Also, they have trouble understanding language. They are no longer able to understand spoken speech, and there even may be cases of word deafness, meaning that they just don't hear certain words. And all of this suggests that Wernicke's aphasia or Wernicke's area in the cortex is really has to do with speech understanding, the ability to understand speech. Producing speech is fine. It's understanding it that is seems to be broken in Wernicke's aphasia. Here's a side view of the human brain. So this is looking at somebody from the side. So here's the forehead. Here's the back of the head here. Eyeballs are about here. This is the top of the head, and this is the surface of the brain. There's nothing has been dissected away. This is just what the surface, the wrinkled cortex looks like. And Broca's area is here near the frontal lobe, and Wernicke's area is back here, um, located in the temporal lobe. Um, there are certain types of brain damage that allows patients to discriminate syllables and phonemes. So they can actually tell you if they've heard syllables before, and they can tell you if they've seen them or heard them before. But but they're not able to understand whole words. In the superior temporal sulcus, there seems to be an area that is activated by voices. So we appear to have a part of our cortex that is only activated by voices. Um, there is this, remember, we have this concept of ventral and dorsal streams. We have the what stream and the how stream. So what something is and how do you use it. It looks like, based on some of these studies that looking at brain damaged people, we have a ventral stream for recognizing speech, which would of course involve Wernicke's area, and a dorsal stream that links the acoustic signal to the movements for producing speech. Um, so really, we have two streams for perceiving speech. One for recognizing it, and another one that links the sounds to the motor movements associated with producing speech. And we use these two things together for perceiving speech, the sound patterns as well as the movements of our mouths and our tongues and whatnot. We use all of that in the perception of speech. The dorsal stream areas are located here. Dorsal means up on top, right? And ventral means on the belly, so down here. And all of these areas work together to enable us to understand speech and to produce speech. The motor movements here for production, speech production of here, and these areas, the ventral stream areas, are involved primarily with helping us to understand speech. One of the things that's in your book here on page, let's see, I believe it's on page 330. On page 330, um, one of the things that this is a fairly recent experiment, and Pasley and his coworkers wanted to see if it was possible to decode speech from looking at the electrical patterns in these speech areas here. Can we figure out what's being heard by recording the electrical activity here and then seeing if there's some sort of correlation between the electrical activity in these areas and what speech is being heard or generated. And in this study, what he did was he let subjects, human subjects, listen to speech. And then, while they were listening to the speech, he recorded a lot of brain activity from a lot of different frequencies and was able to derive these patterns of frequencies. These patterns of frequencies were then fed into software that looked for patterns that correlated with the speech that was being listened to. And sure enough, based on the electrical activity of the speech parts of the brain, these guys figured out that they were able to reconstruct spectrograms of the same sound that the person was listening to. Now, if you think about it, that's pretty cool, right? The ability to record what's going on in the brain and recreate what has been experienced by the brain. Here's some of the sounds that were some of the words that were presented. So deep, jazz, fook, cause, ors, dim, and these are the spectrographs of the sounds that were presented. And then here is the reproduced, reconstructed spectrograms. And there's a pretty good correlation. I mean, they're not perfect, right? It's not like absolute, one-to-one match. But if you look at this one and this one, this one and this one, this one and this one, you see that you can tell that they go with each one of these different. Each one pairs off with the other. This is a remarkable finding. This ability to record information and then reconstruct it from the activity of the human brain. Action. There's a very, very strong link between the movement of all of the mouth, tongue, breathing to produce sounds and the mechanisms for perceiving sounds. We have evidence from monkeys that there are audiovisual mirror neurons. In other words, as a monkey is perceiving sounds made by other monkeys, this activates mirror neurons in the areas of their brain that correspond to them activating the sounds. Um, a guy by the name of D'Ausilio used transcranial magnetic stimulation, and basically what this is, it's the ability to focus a very powerful magnetic field on a spot on the cortex or in the brain. And what this does is it shuts down that part of the brain. So you can shut off different little spots of the human cortex temporarily. It doesn't cause permanent damage. The very powerful magnetic field simply disrupts the neural firing in that little spot where it's being focused. And when he did this on the different areas of the brain that are related to speech production and speech perception, he found he was able to alter speech production and speech perception simultaneously by affecting specific areas of the cortex. So, for example, this area here, the lip area, it lights up. It has a very faster. It has a faster firing to B and P sounds, B and P, right? And if you notice, these are plosive sounds, meaning that we form them by pursing our lips and then releasing air, and it's associated with more activity in the lip area. The faster activity for the sounds T, T, and D are in the tongue area. And again, if you make these sounds, you'll notice that it involves more the tongue. In other words, your tongue curls up and then releases the air. And whenever we hear those sounds, whenever we just hear them, we get much quicker responses, much more vigorous responding in the tongue area or in the lip area for B and P sounds. So there's this very strong link between the sounds that we hear and the lighting up of areas of the brain that are associated with producing those sounds. So another way that we study speech perception is by looking at what infants can do. Because if you want to understand the development of speech perception ultimately in humans, one of the things you have to look at is how it is that we go from being born all the way to producing speech by the time we're 2 to 3 years old. That developmental period is still a big black box to science, and we are trying to understand how it is that the human brain, from birth until about until about 5 or 6 years old, acquires speech, how it acquires the ability to identify the language and learn the language of the people that are around the baby. Um, there's a classical set of experiments that you can do called categorical perception in order to be able to determine when at some point you can tell a difference between one sound and another sound. And this is very similar to the study that we talked about before where we adjusted the voice onset time to determine the sound between two and like two T and D, and you adjust the voice onset time until you hit that phonetic boundary, and then it switches from being do to two, right? Because the voice onset time is longer for the T sound than it is for the D sound. They can do these experiments in babies now using a habituation procedure. Um, and basically, the core basis of these types of studies is the fact that if you keep presenting the same stimulation to a baby over and over again, they get bored with it and they quit paying attention to it. Or they'll quit responding to it. In this case, what they did was they looked at 1 month old infants. And basically what they did was they measured the amount of times the baby was sucking on a pacifier, and this pacifier was connected so that you could count how many times the baby sucks on it. And whenever babies are really interested in something, one of the things that they do is they suck harder. So if they're really into something, they'll be there sucking their little pacifier, and then if they're bored with it, they'll just kind of stop sucking on it. Well, you can use that as a dependent variable to see how they're perceiving things. If they stop responding to something, that means they've perceived it and they remember it from seeing it before, and that's exactly what they did here. They presented a sound, I'm sorry, a set of phonemes to these babies where the voice onset time was 20 milliseconds. And they slowly adjusted the voice onset time until and the baby, as you can see, was like really excited about it and then got bored with it. But as soon as the voice onset time hit 40 milliseconds, this was the phonetic boundary, the baby was able to perceive a new a new a new sound, and it responded as such by paying attention to the new sound. Here we have the same study, the same procedure, except the voice onset time, instead of going from 20 to 40, went from 60 to 80. Now, in this with this particular set of sounds, the phonetic boundary was between 20 and 40. Now, since it's between 20 and 40, we would expect that after you pass 40, there should be no change. As you increase the voice onset time, the baby should still be perceiving the same thing, and that's exactly what happens. Once we've crossed this phonetic boundary here, where the baby gets excited about it, there they go. They're jazzed about it. It's pretty cool, but starts getting boring. And even when they hit 80, this is not the phonetic boundary. There's no change in behavior. There's a slight little bump up here, but it's not significant, and the baby just is bored. And then, of course, if we do the control group where we just don't change anything, we just like play the same voice sound with the voice onset time, you see this pattern here, which is similar to this one here. So what this tells us is that little babies as young as a month old are able to perceive differences in voice onset time, which is really important for us to know, because this tells us that they have the basics of speech perception, basic components of speech perception almost at birth. Um, Experience-dependent plasticity. It's the brain's ability to respond to specific stimuli that occurs as a result of experience. Now, um, one of the really important aspects of this, and let me go back to that slide real quick. Yeah, let me go back to this slide here. Sorry about that. One of the really important aspects of this is that there's only a certain time window where the brain is able to alter itself based on experience. And that time window in humans for language is when we're very young. Usually up until about the age of about 8 or so is when we stop being able to acquire languages. You'll know that it's really, for those of you that have had to learn a second language as adults, you know it's very difficult. But children, of course, do it automatically because their brains are tuned to that. That's why it's also important to talk to babies, let babies hear you talking to other people, and to read to babies when they're very young. Because what you're doing is you are presenting them with a lot of different words and phonemes and uh, um, transition sounds. You're presenting them with all this stuff that's going to enable them to pick up their language much easier and perform much better in language-based tasks when they grow up.